This is a piece that's slightly outside my usual writing for bands, and you're quite right. It is a kind of very joyous piece, and you know, that's why I also like it very much. It's a kind of, I had written some of the music previously to this. I was commissioned to write a piece for Scotland, and I wrote a piece called Elegy and Dance. And then I received a commission to write the work for the National Youth Brass Band Final at the Albert Hall in 1986. And I looked back on the Elegy and Dance, and sort of only lasted 8 minutes, so I knew that that was a little bit too short. So I decided to write 2 other movements. The fanfare, again, is not a new fanfare. I kind of grabbed it from earlier music. The Festivities, which is the first movement proper, is an original piece, movement added to it. So you've got a 4-movement work: fanfare, Festivities, Elegy and Dance. So there's a lot of diverse kinds of music in that. And it is joyous, absolutely, it is. The Elegy, of course, sets a different mood, because an elegy is a kind of quite thoughtful and a sort of intense kind of musical language, I suppose. And it's, again, a big flugelhorn solo. So again, unusual to have such an extended solo. Could have written it for solo cornet, decided flugelhorn, much more in keeping with what an elegy might be. And so that's the kind of basis of the piece. And as I've said, it was written for the National Youth Brass Band Championships. But of course, as we know, youth bands these days, and have been for a long time, are rather good. So the final bands in that competition could certainly all play it reasonably well, and I think the winning band was very good indeed. So again, this will be the 3rd section for the Dutch nationals, and yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing it, because there's a lot of different kinds of music in it, and it's going to be interesting to see what they make of it, really. Well, I suppose like any score, when a conductor looks at it for the first time, you try to do an analysis of what the music is trying to say. You look at things like the tempo markings, and you probably get your metronome out and think, okay, that's the speed he wants. Are we going to keep to that or not? Well, generally speaking, it's quite sensible to keep fairly close to metronome speeds, and sometimes all composers suffer this. Sometimes a conductor takes off, you know, as if they're going on a fancy flight into the night, and it goes like mad, far faster than you wrote it. So it's a question of making those kind of judgments about tempi, and then what's the music about, what's it trying to say. Well, obviously, as I've said already, the elegy is a very thoughtful and contemplative kind of movement, and therefore should be played, I suppose, when I say rather darkly, then think about brass band sound. Think about actually not a bright sound for that, but a more covered sound. And if you can get the right sound for the band and the right sound for the soloist, then you're going to be able to do that. But then straight away after that, you've got the dance, which is a sheer exuberant kind of dance, not unlike the style of the English composer Malcolm Arnold, actually. And his he wrote sets of English dances, Scots dances, Welsh dances, etc. It's rather like that. That's very rhythmic, lots of changing time patterns, so very precise playing, very rhythmic playing, etc. So again, not too ponderous, but rather bright, rather sprung rhythms, get a lot of rhythmic drive, and then you'll achieve something of what I hope to get from bands for this. There are certain basics with brass band playing, like any playing actually, orchestral or brass, when intonation is the first precept of good playing. There's nothing worse than hearing an out-of-tune brass band. So yes, you have to work very carefully on intonation. And of course, as you know, brass instruments aren't perfect. They're compensating instruments. So you have things like slides, which you control, called the trigger. And certain notes are either flat or sharp, in terms of the enharmonics. So you have to adjust for that as a player and be sensible, and learn what the flat notes are that need helping, or the sharp notes that need pulling back. And then it's up to the conductor, of course, where you have a big chord, to make sure that that is perfectly in tune. So there are lots of things with what I would call the basics of brass playing, which I think we have to solve before you could make a musical performance. I think there's a tendency these days with all brass bands, but actually the top section bands particularly, to try to produce a sound which they can't contain. And that leads to overblowing, and therefore, in a sense, out of tune playing, because obviously if you try to blow a brass instrument too hard, it's going to go sharp. And if some are doing that and others aren't, you're going to get a chord which is actually out of tune, because you've got a trombone section, for example, who might be blowing the hell out of it, but who are sharp, and therefore the bottom of the chord is sharp, the rest of it isn't. One of the problems I find, Martin, at the moment is that the European own choice pieces, which the bands are sort of commissioning, half of them these days, they want these big impact pieces. And so you get composers who are writing, trying to fulfill what the bands want. They're writing not only big textured pieces for the brass players, but the percussion sections now have become so large. And let's say that sometimes the composers aren't using the skill of orchestration as they might. So the percussion are bashing away, and often drowning the band, who then respond by, of course, trying to play above them. So you get this terrible kind of overblowing from everybody, overplaying from the percussion, produces a rather nasty sound. So yeah, to answer your question, it's lovely to hear a brass band playing in a contained way, not overblowing, trying to balance the chords, and also trying to produce a real pianissimo. It's the other thing that's missing at the moment. How often do you hear a band produce a real pianissimo? So yeah, they could do a lot more with dynamics and terracing the dynamics.